The latest employment report showing companies were busy hiring. Will new taxes in the massive spending bill cause job creators to become job cutters? Here to discuss it, economist Michael Szanto and Steve Moore, along with Bulltick Capital Markets strategist Catherine Rooney-Vera. Catherine, good to see you. Good to see you all, gentlemen. Catherine, you don't raise taxes in a down economy. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion about whether it's a recession, but we've had 2 negative quarters. That's a slowdown. You just don't raise taxes in a slowdown, do you?
You don't raise taxes. You certainly don't implement what is called a inflation reduction bill, which effectively is going to, as your previous guest mentioned, do exactly the opposite. The U.S. economy is at a crossroads. And the important thing here is inflation and consumer. The consumer is hurting. The consumer is facing double-digit inflation rates on food and gas. So certainly what you don't want to do is increase taxes, decrease incentives for investing, and throw the economy even further into contraction.
And Steve, we know what works and what doesn't because we have history to guide us. I mean, we had 2 presidents who came into a recession and got out of it. One was Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s. They had to kill inflation, and in order to do so, we had a recession. But what brought us out of that recession was lowering taxes and lowering regulations. He had an 8-year term of an average growth of 3.6%. On the other hand, we have Barack Obama. He came in with a recession. He increased taxes and increased regulations. He had an average growth rate of under 2%. So if you want to grow the economy, you don't raise taxes and regulations, right?
Well, you're exactly right about that, David. And you started off the show noting that there were 200 prominent economists who basically say this will increase inflation. By the way, I'll raise my hand. I'm one of those people on that list. But you know what's so interesting is the left has this similar letter by prominent economists saying that it won't cause inflation. What's funny about that, David, is these are the same people a year ago who said that the Biden plan last year wouldn't cause inflation. We had 9% inflation. So why would anyone listen to them? Obviously, if you spend more and tax more, you're going to make inflation worse. And you know what? It doesn't actually even matter what economists like me say. David, a poll shows that just came out yesterday, less than 15% of Americans believe this will make inflation better, and most Americans are right. They think it's going to make it worse.
Well, Michael, you're spending more money. I know they claim that over the long term we'll end up cutting the deficit. Over the long term we'll end up bringing. But when the government spends more money, isn't that what causes inflation?
No, not exactly in this case, because we have an unusual type of recession here, if you call it recession, where the economy is also somewhat overheating. So some of what's causing inflation is an overheating economy, and increasing some taxes is like hitting fiscal brakes lightly, and that's in concert with the Fed that's also hitting a little bit of brakes. And if the economy stops overheating, the taxes can actually be lowered. But a lot of this bill is actually an energy bill, and we do have energy challenges. And I noticed that it even has provisions for nuclear energy. So it's not some extreme leftist progressive bill.
Well, it does, but Catherine, at the same time, it has provisions for tax rebates for electric cars and everything, but most Americans can't afford those electric cars. Not right now, because they're squeezing themselves just to put food on the table.
Yeah, that's right. It's a very difficult environment. And the fact is that the Inflation Reduction Bill is everything but, as we've alluded to, it tackles climate change. It talks about additional goodies, additional spending that has nothing to do with inflation. It's kind of humorous, David, if you think about the government thinking that it can, with some bill, bring down inflation. Yeah. It reminds me of the infrastructure plan of this current president a year or 2 ago, which was packed with climate change and increases in Medicare. It had nothing to do with infrastructure. The same thing is going on. Let's be honest with the name.
Well, you're not old enough to remember whip inflation now. That was Gerald Ford, a Republican president, had to deal with inflation. He just thought that a pin would help, and it didn't. Steve, the bottom line is, to Michael's point, a lot of people say the economy's too hot, but isn't the problem that we're not producing enough? Inflation, one of the sides of inflation is if you have too few goods, And because we have supply chain problems, because we have labor shortage, et cetera, but also because we have inflation, we're not producing enough. Maybe it's not that the economy's too hot, but that it's just not producing enough.
Well, economy too hot. I mean, I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah,
we just
too
had
negative growth
quarters, so the economy is in recession. I mean, it's a soft recession. It's a mild recession. The biggest problem for American families right now is this is a cost of living recession.
Yes.
Americans are getting crushed by this 9% inflation rate. We got a good jobs report yesterday, but it still shows, David, wages up 5.2%, inflation up 9.1%. The average American family has lost $4,000. Raising taxes, raising spending on top of that makes absolutely no sense.
You're an all-star panel, but we've run out of time. We've got to go. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it, and gals.